welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Okay, hi. This is Turn the Page from the Syosset Public Library, and this is Evelyn.
And I'm Donna.
And we also have with us Ann Napolitano, who wrote Dear Edward, which Donna and I both read and absolutely loved. So we're so excited to be talking to Ann. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you. This book was just so fabulous. The two of us both read it. I read it during the summer. And Donna read it before that and told me how great it was, so I couldn't wait to read it. And it's just a fabulous book. We absolutely love it. So thank you so much. And we're so excited to talk to you about everything about the book. So Donna's going to start.
Okay, and would you please tell our listeners a little about Dear Edward?
Sure. I worked on it for 8 years. It started with my becoming obsessed with a story in the news. There was a plane crash in 2010. It was a flight from South Africa bound for London, and it crashed in Libya. And there was only one survivor, and it was a 9-year-old Dutch boy. And they found him still strapped into his airplane seat about a half mile away from the rest of the wreckage, and he had a punctured lung and a broken leg, but he was otherwise fine. And everyone else on the flight had died immediately, including his parents and his brother. And it was a huge story at the time. We were all talking about it. It was on all the 24/7 news, all the newspapers, etc. But so much has happened since then that almost nobody remembers it anymore. But I couldn't read enough about the story. There's a picture of the little boy in the hospital. And I was a mother of two. I'm still a mother, but my two sons were really young at the time. And this little boy in the hospital bed, looking so small and so broken, just completely broke my heart. And I needed to know that he could be okay, and I also couldn't imagine how he could be okay in this situation. His aunt and uncle came and adopted him and brought him home to Holland. And they did an amazing job of protecting his privacy from, the first moment. They blacked out the windows of their car. There were no interviews. They took him home and they protected him, which was amazing. But that also meant that I couldn't know that he was okay because I couldn't know anything about him. And so almost immediately I knew that I was going to have to write a story in which I could create a set of circumstances where a little boy in this situation could be okay.
Okay, you mentioned that it took you 8 years to write it. How did you sustain yourself over such a long period, keeping at it? And are you writing every day, or how did that work?
Yeah, the first year of the process, the first year I spent researching, taking notes, and thinking. My husband actually had my book before this, which is called A Good Hard Look, took 7 years to write. And that book was very hard for me. It was really challenging. I didn't want to write a novel that had Flannery O'Connor in it, who ended up being in that novel. I just fought that book the whole time. And also I've always identified as what people call an intuitive writer, so it's an act of discovery for me. I'll start writing a scene, and then someone will walk into the room and say something, and I'll be surprised, and that's a completely delightful way of writing because it's almost like being a reader. You're discovering it as you go along. But in A Good Hard Look, when you're that mired in the story and you're literally opening doors and walking through them and being surprised, it's very hard to sort of start creating an overall shape for the book. And so I had really struggled during that book. So my husband suggested to me that I spend the first year of the next book not writing because I love writing sentences. There's nothing I like better than making up pretty sentences. But when I'm doing that and when I'm in a scene, it's like the cerebral part of my brain shuts off and I cannot think. I'm feeling the story as opposed to thinking about it. So for this book, I spent a year thinking, which was really challenging for me, but was such a good idea. And I'm doing it again now for the next book because it was very valuable for me. So that first year was thinking, researching, interviewing, reading, because I had a lot of research to do because I didn't know anything about planes, plane crashes. I got to choose who I wanted to follow on the plane because everyone flies, so that gave me a great opportunity to be with very different passengers from each other. So I did research on each of the passengers. And then when I started writing, I do basically write every day, depending on like the state of my life. How much I write that day is very variable. Like it ranges from 5 minutes to 4 hours, say. When I'm really deeply in it, probably more than 4 hours. But and the sustaining it's actually it's what I love doing. So actually and I loved writing this book. It was a very joyful experience for me, more so than anything else I've written, which seems ironic because it's an incredibly sad book, obviously. But being in this world with Edward and the people that came to step forward for him and were kind to him ended up being like a wonderful alternate universe for me to exist in.
Well, obviously, the universe all agrees with you because your book was chosen as the January 2020 Today Show Read with Jenna Book Club pick. The Barnes & Noble Book Club selected Dear Edward as their January 2020 book. Books A Million also selected it as their 2020 President pick. It was chosen as the December Book of the Month, even though it did come out in January. And it was chosen as an Indie Next pick, and Library Read selected it as their number one pick in January, and Amazon Best Book of the Month for January 2020. That is just unbelievable. What was it like when you got the call from Jenna telling you that it was going to be the Today Show pick?
Well, it's my editor who told me. I haven't spoken to Jenna yet personally.
Oh, okay. That was one of our questions, when you're going to be speaking with Jenna.
Yeah, I've spoken to her producers. But I imagine the first time I'll actually speak to her will be at the end of the month when I go on the Today Show to sort of do the Answer Book Club questions.
Oh, great. Do you have a date for that yet?
I think it's January 30th.
Okay, great. Terrific.
Yeah. It's been very exciting. It
Sure.
feels very surreal.
Right.
Like it's very strange and very wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of feels like it's happening to somebody else.
Uh-huh.
But in a way where I'm like, oh, I'm glad I get to have this experience for this other person.
Now, is the goal to get on the New York Times bestseller list?
Well, that's my publisher's goal.
Okay.
I've never, because it takes me so long to write the books, and actually when I finished Dear Edward, I really didn't know if it was even going to find a publisher, because my other two books hadn't done that well, and I'm not like a exciting debut writer, obviously, and I'm what they considered a mid-list writer, a mid-career mid-list writer, which is not something that publishers go running towards. So the fact that it, from the very beginning, I've been shocked at each stage with this book and gratified, but my aspirations, my expectations and everything were I left behind about a year and a half ago when I sold the book, because I never would have expected any of this. Well,
we're very, very happy for you because we did love the book. We recommend it to...
You guys have been so generous and so kind about the book on social media. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's been Donna. Donna's a big Twitter.
I know.
Big Twitter person around here. She's trying to get me to do it also. I'm not as good as her. She's really big on Twitter.
Yeah, no, and you've been so kind about the book.
Well, when we love a book, we like to promote it. We give it, we put it on hold for all of our patrons that we know are going to love it. And,
oh, you do?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah, so
that's so nice.
Yeah. So we just have some questions about the research you did for each of all the people that were on the plane, like each person on the plane that you brought out their character. How did you research each one of them?
Well, I basically ended up reading a book or two for each of the characters. So for Crispin Cox, who is the sort of octogenarian billionaire who's on the flight first class, who's very unwell on the plane, I read Jack Welch's Straight from the Gut, which is his autobiography, which is very, very funny. It's not intentionally funny, but it's very funny. Like, it's in his voice, and he just so deeply believes his entire capitalist superpowers that I found it really entertaining and really interesting. For Bruce Adler, the father, who's a pure mathematician, I have a friend who's a pure mathematician, and it's always fascinated me because that's the kind of math that does not involve numbers at all. It's theoretical, and it's like four-dimensional, and they talk about things like there being trees in the space-time universe with beads hanging from them. I love hearing her talk about it because I don't know what she's talking about at all, and it sounds like art as opposed to anything that I could recognize. Mm-hmm. And then David Foster Wallace wrote a book about math. I think it's called Everything and Beyond, and that was really interesting and helpful as well. For Benjamin Stillman, the soldier on the plane, I read War by Sebastian Junger, which is a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. And also I have a friend who is an officer in the Army, so I spoke to him about what Benjamin's experience would have been. And then as part of this year challenge that my husband set me, he also wanted me to read more books outside of my genre, which basically would be literary fiction. Mm-hmm. And so I read a lot more nonfiction that year, but I also read a lot more, many more graphic novels than I had prior to that. And I read the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. And that series inspired Florida, who's the character on the plane who believes that she's had multiple lives, because it was so exciting to read how Gaiman just drops or disregards all these boundaries like space-time. All the dimensions are up for grabs for him in this really joyful way. And so I was like, but I can have this character that, has been in various lives for as long as time, which was also very exciting.
Is Florida, does she show up again as Madame Victory with her bells? Yes. I loved that part. I really...
Not very many people seem to be noticing that.
I underlined it and put little question marks and everything in my copy. Yes, absolutely.
I felt like it was so heavy-handed, but I'm actually pleased that it's not terribly heavy-handed and not everyone is seeing it.
I think the structure and the content just complement each other so much. It's just an unbelievably wonderfully written, such a strong story. I can't tell enough people to read it. It just blew me away.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Are there any plans to make it into a film or adapt it in any way?
I mean, it has a film agent. There's talk of making it into perhaps like they seem to be leaning towards like a television series with a limited, whatever you call that, a limited
run.
Right,
yeah, a few
like,
episodes.
8 episodes or whatever.
Wow.
But nothing has happened yet. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine it being made into.
Have you pictured who you think should play some of the characters? Like Edward, for instance? That would be a hard one.
It would be hard. Well, it would be hard because I don't know that many, like you obviously would have to be like a 12, 13, 14-year-old. And I'm not well versed on the young male actors. But also, like, in my head, they already exist. So it's much easier for me to cast somebody else's book than to cast my own, I think.
Right.
Because to me, they are real people that live like in the universe in my head.
Right. In terms of the audiobook, I only got to listen to a brief excerpt, and you have one narrator. Were you consulted at all about whether it would be like multiple voices or how they produced it actually?
Yeah, they spoke to me about it, but I don't think that I had what would be considered the final say in any way. And also, I think the main thing that they debated was whether it should be a male narrator or a female narrator, because obviously it's Edward's book. Well, in many ways, it's Edward's book. But obviously they chose female. I feel like I feel similar for the movie or whatever. Like, the novel, I have full engagement and ownership of, but like if you're talking about changing forms, even reading it, I don't feel like I'm the best person to consult. I've actually only heard an excerpt too, but I know Cassandra Campbell, who read it, is a wonderful reader. I actually listened to recently listened to the Where the Crawdads Sing, because I had never read it.
Yeah,
and she read that beautifully.
Yes, she's wonderful. She's a very good audiobook narrator.
Yeah.
In terms of audios for other countries, do you know if they redo it? I mean, obviously for a different language. I guess what I'm asking is for the UK, do they re-record it, or do they just use the same American version?
No, they're using I believe, I'm virtually sure they're using the same one.
Okay. I always wondered about that.
Yeah, obviously in other languages. That's a great question about other countries, because I think they wait and see how the book does, whether they decide to record it in other languages. I mean, I don't know how many languages it's been bought into, because it's been bought by 15 countries, but
wow.
Yeah, but those are not all. Well, a lot of them are translations, obviously. The English version comes out February 20th. I know it comes out actually in Holland that day too, and then it's sort of, they stagger on from there because they had to translate the final copy. Obviously.
Will you be traveling to all these countries?
Well, I'm going to England for a week, the week that it comes out next month.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, that'll be fun. My husband actually is English. So
oh, wow.
My in-laws live there. So it's nice.
Donna's jealous now.
That's my alter ego is the Anglophile librarian.
Oh, yeah,
so,
that's right.
Right, so
yes.
There it goes.
Yes,
yeah.
Well, me too. I also really enjoy the English and England, so I'm excited to be going there. And I don't have plans right now to go to other countries, but we'll see.
Are you touring the country, though? Have you?
Yeah, I'm going, well, yes. For like the next 2 months, it's kind of building out as the book goes along, but I'm going to Alabama this week because the Books A Million, actually, that's where their headquarters is.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So I'm doing 2 Books A Million events, one in Ohio, one in Alabama.
Oh.
I'm going to San Francisco and then Southern California. I'm going to D.C. And England and Rhode Island.
Wow.
I think that's it so far.
Very nice. Is it exciting for you? Is this like a great time in your life?
Yeah, it's very exciting. It is weird. Like it's very disorienting, kind of, because I am like a supreme introvert, and I certainly can do all these things, and I think I can do them well, but it does like drain me as opposed to fill me up,
right?
The way that allegedly extroverts feel, and I feel vulnerable because I feel like this book that I love so much, it's just out there now. but it's also very exciting.
And like when you're traveling now and everything, are you reading? And I guess the follow up to that also is, when you're writing, are you also reading? I know you said you read for research, but when you're actually composing.
Oh yes. Well, so when I'm traveling, am I reading books?
Yes.
It's absolutely, yeah. Actually, I feel like one of the best places to read in the world is on an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't love flying, which makes sense because of my book, but it is a great place to read. I actually just finished this morning. I keep getting the title wrong, but A Tale for Time Being. Is that by Ruth
Ozeki?
Ah, okay.
Did you guys read that?
No, I haven't read that.
Oh my God, it's so good. I recommend it so highly. A Tale for Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. Yes. Actually, I listen to a lot of books during this sort of traveling in this period because I find it kind of soothing to have a narrative going on
Absolutely.
in my brain.
Yes, definitely.
Couldn't agree with you more on that. We love audiobooks.
I love reading books too. Usually I prefer that, but I think right now, because everything feels so vulnerable and strange to me, it's like having a story piped into my head is very soothing. And when I'm writing, so Dear Edward took so long. I would say for like 5 of the 8 years I can read normally, and then for like the 3 years that I'm very deeply in it, like probably the 3 last years, where it's like it is a fully realized world, and I'm sort of plumbing deeper and deeper and deeper into its depths, I can't read as well, and that's actually really distressing to me at the time. But it's like I'm so deeply in one fictional universe that I can't go into another one.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I know, but I don't like it. Like that's when I finished Dear, when I finished the copy edits, which was about a year ago. It was like exhilarating going back into reading in like the full-bodied way that I normally do, and I've enjoyed it so much for this past year. And I'm hoping that I can hold on to that at least in the beginning of the new project when I'm not like fully submerged yet.
Can you tell us what the new project's about?
Well, I'm in the note-taking stage in the first year. Technically, the first year actually will end like February, March. I believe it's going to take place in Chicago, and it's 10 years later, and Shay and Edward are in this book as well.
Oh, wonderful.
Very intriguing.
Okay. So it's going to be a series or
follow on?
No, I mean, I had no intention. I wouldn't say series. I think there's another story to tell.
Okay. Shay and Edward's relationship, that's what it is, or?
Well, it would be in it, but
it's not the main part of this.
I think it has to do with Shay's father, who's mentioned in Dear Edward. But.
Okay, very nice. Do you want to talk about the relationship between Edward and his brother Jordan?
Sure. So I mentioned that when I became obsessed with the news story in 2010, my sons were 1 and 3, and they're now 10 and 12.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, time flies.
Yeah.
But so at that period in time, like toddlers, I always compare to like drunk bear cubs. Like they're just rolling around on the floor and, like wearing pants on their head and smeared with jelly. Like they're ridiculous and they're more like animal cub than they are humans. So you can't really know anything about them at that stage. Like you can't be like, oh, I think he's a mathematician, or, oh my gosh, he's so kind. They're just like these bumbling creatures that you adore and keep alive. So the only thing that I did know about them when I started writing was that they were deeply in love with each other. And I can't take any credit for that, and nor can my husband. It was when my younger son was born, it was like for my older son, it was like he was being reunited with him as opposed to being introduced to him. Like they just immediately, like deeply, deeply loved each other. And it seems like, an odds thing, like they just happened to be, this deep kinship. So, as I started writing the book and I was making my way into Edward's story, I would have thought, and intuitively and intellectually would have thought that the loss of his parents would be his greatest loss.
Right.
But I realized as I walked into it with him that it was actually the loss of his brother, because they were so intertwined. And also, you're meant to leave your parents at a certain stage. You go off and have your own adult life and have your own family and you perhaps move away, but you're not really supposed to leave your sibling. They are your peer. So my boys' love just ended up baking itself into that relationship in a way that I hadn't anticipated, but was really lovely.
I have a question back on your process. Do you write at the keyboard, or do you handwrite, or do you dictate?
I have terrible handwriting, so I write on the computer. For Dear Edward, I used a program called Scrivener, Scrivener.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's often used for movie writing because it has a feature in it where you can use like a cork, it actually looks like a cork board, so you can kind of like map out different chapters and then move them around. And also you can store all of your research like on the sidebar, so like everything's in one place. And it was really nice because I opened, I've been using Word before that, and actually right now I'm using Word too. And you open Word for like a million things I do for over the course of like, writing stuff for your publisher or, writing a letter, etc. But when I opened Scrivener, it was only for that book, and everything that went into that was only in there.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very helpful. And, exporting it out to Word ended up being tricky, but that is my process is always in writing, not in handwriting.
Interesting. Okay. In terms of your background in reading and whatever, I always like to ask people what are like your top reads all during your life. Not necessarily the best book you read, but the best book for you at that perfect moment, like your best reads.
That's a great question. I think that's such a good question too, because that's entirely what it is. Like it's about the right book meeting you in the right moment, and if you read it later on, you wouldn't have that reaction, and also if you read it earlier, you might not even like that book because you're not ready for it.
Right.
Actually, I felt that way about this Ruth. I listened to the Ruth Ozeki novel, which she actually reads in the audiobook for this past week, as all this like noisiness about my book coming out, and it was the perfect book for balancing that for me. So I feel so grateful to that novel. But when I was younger, it was in high school. I read The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing,
right?
Which was really instrumental in my thinking of myself as a writer and as a female writer. And then in college, I went on a huge Henry James kick. I really love his writing, and The Ambassadors by him, the novel, was really important to me because it has the main character is that like
Struther?
Struther, yeah. He's a middle-aged man who sort of regrets that he never engaged with his own life.
Right.
And so there's all this sort of quiet, like the drama is in many ways that he didn't, like, is a regret over this very quiet regret over having missed taking chances and making choices earlier. And there's something about like the quiet lanes in that novel that I would have said I would never write a book about a plane crash or anything large. I thought that all of my work would be, and has more or less up until now been, sort of smaller moments. And I think there are a lot of small moments in Dear Edward. It just is framed around a plane crash.
Right.
But the Ambassadors was revelatory to me in the sense that you could build a big story that was, had these kind of quiet highways in it. And then Ray McCarver's stories in college as well. The Story Cathedral was blew off the roof of my head when I read it as a undergraduate. The same thing for the Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison.
Yes.
I could not believe how beautiful it was.
Yeah, I've always regretted not having a class for that book because I think I needed a class to sort of shape the reading and to share about it. I just read it on my own.
I read that in a class.
Yeah.
That is true. I took a class that was devoted to Finnegan's Wake while I was in college, and the class started with like 15 students and it ended with like 5.
Right. I can understand.
It was like running a marathon. Yeah, but I felt so proud of myself when I got to the book that I actually read the whole thing. But there's no way that I could have read it without a class. So there is certain literature that is enhanced by having someone help you through it.
Well, hopefully one day your book will be on the list of must-reads for some classes too.
Definitely. There's so much to discuss in it. It's just the questions just open out and you learn about yourself as you read it.
And one of us will probably do a book discussion of it here. So maybe we can contact you again, and maybe you could Skype in when we do that.
Yeah, sure.
That would be wonderful. We want to thank Ann Napolitano for joining us today on Turn the Page podcast. We really appreciate the time, and we look forward to more books by you and speaking to you again when the next one comes out.
Well, thank you so much for having me on and for your wonderful support for the book. I really appreciate it.
So we're going to end this chapter of Turn the Page. This is Evelyn.
This is Donna.
And also we have Ann Napolitano with us. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.